Hey, Ian, thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to just kind of have you introduce yourself if that's okay.
Yeah, my name is Ian Mearns, and I'm a counselor. Yeah,
There's more than that. There must be.
yeah. So I am currently living in the Seattle area. I've worked in mental health for the last 14 years. About 2011, I started working social work, and then eventually branched over to working with in mental health. After working with kids in foster care, a lot of them were in the criminal justice system in juvenile detention. So within that process, I worked a lot with psychiatrists and psychologists, and it really, really interested me. So it pushed me over into this type of work.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And tell me a little bit about your credentials, like what you've studied to get to this point.
Yeah, so my journey has been interesting. I was in the military after high school. I was in the Marine Corps, and then I came home and I wanted to be a teacher. So I applied to a bachelor's program after getting my associates. I didn't get into that program, but I did get into the University of Washington. So I did a bachelor's of urban studies there, which pushed me into working with local schools in Tacoma. There's a really cool program that helped us go into elementary school, McCarver, which is it's one of the most underserved populations in terms of poverty in this state. It's in the hilltop in Tacoma, and I really loved doing that work. And my teacher wanted me to stay at UW Tacoma, so I did, and I ended up doing a master's there in interdisciplinary arts and sciences, which was on topics I learned in urban studies. I did it on urban farming as a solution to homelessness. That was my master's thesis. And then once I was done there, I started working for a nonprofit in Seattle doing data entry. I didn't really enjoy it. So I started looking for other jobs in social, kind of human services field. And
Hmm.
then I started working for the state of Washington within children's services, DCYA, Department of Child Family Youth. I think that's what it's called. I always forget the acronym.
I think it's DCYF. Yeah.
Yeah, so did that for almost 4 years. As I was working there, really loved it. I grew up with CPS in my own house, and it was definitely a learning curve to see how other kids grew up and also how good my life was in a lot of ways, but also reminding me how lucky I was to be in the position I am. So I went back to school to get my master's in social work, and then my dad passed away during that time, and so I took a break, and I had already took a break for the MSW program. I'd already applied to get my doctorate in education, so then I went to Northeastern, finished the doctorate in education, went back to finish my MSW at a school called Yeshiva, and then as I was finishing my MSW, one of the professors asked me if I wanted to do the MSW PhD program, and now I just finished the last primary class of the PhD program, but I have to finish the dissertation.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you had a lot of time in school and through various kind of like facility settings and trainings that you've done. Tell me a little bit about you said that you had had some experiences in your childhood with the foster care system. How did that kind of shape your decisions, like now
Yeah.
looking back on it?
So I didn't really it's kinda interesting when I was in like a lot of kids and adults as we grow up in different situations, I really didn't understand it was abuse until I was older, right? So most of the kids in my friend group were in the same kinda household. Mine was, I think, a little bit more violent, but there was substance abuse in my house, but it was less than a lot of my other friends. So, and as I got older, I went to the military and all these different things, but I kept my lens of what I was looking at really changed because I started to understand maybe my upbringing wasn't the same as others, right? So once I went to the military, one of the things I remember the most that kind of I guess, a turning point within my own understanding is when I was in Iraq in the Marine Corps. It was the first time I felt stable, which isn't normal, right? Because my life was so full of chaos growing up that being in that situation. And so learning that about myself and not wanting, and part of my thesis I did at the University of Washington, there was a personal part of it that they wanted us to do. And a lot of that was focused on my own kind of changing from being not destructive in the military, but fighting this war on terrorism, all these things, and I wanted to come back and do something different. I wanted to change something, maybe do some good, basically, right? So,
Makes sense.
yeah.
So, like, you saw basically when you were in the military, it sounds like you were like, "This is weird. I feel really kind of, like, stable," maybe because of all the, connection you were having with other people in the military, and also I think they have you on a very strict kind of, like, regimen of what you're doing, so maybe that gave you, like, stability, it sounds like?
Yeah, totally. Stability, just kind of a sense of belonging, support emotionally that I never got growing up. And for my parents, it's and again, all this stuff is unfortunately very generational, right? My dad came from a different country. His dad was in World War II. My great grandpa was in World War One. It's kind of like that movie Forrest Gump in terms of service. My dad was during Vietnam, I was in during Iraq, and then all the way back, right, to the beginning of the 20th century. So that really had an effect in terms of my understanding of things once started learning more about abuse and how it happens generational. And some things were better in my upbringing, but some things were worse. And what I really learned from all that is that, and getting help myself, is that we all need some kind of support to get to the places we are able to. I have been so lucky to be in the place I am in my life because of the things that the military gave me. Education in my job I was doing, resilience, learning how to rise above certain situations, but also, unfortunately, when I came home, I struggled a lot with mental illness, right? Like a lot of guys do. I went to Iraq twice. I was a combat engineer. I was part of the second time I was there, we looked for IEDs for like week on, week off, right? So imagine the stress of that in front of convoys. I lost friends and things of that nature. And when I got home, I didn't think anything of it. I was like, I mean, I did, right? But not like it affected me. But all my friends saw something, my parents, all that stuff. And so eventually, over time, I realized I needed help too, not just helping people all the time, within the child welfare system, all that stuff. I really didn't get any help until I was out of the military for almost 10 years. But when I did, it was I mean, becoming a parent, all these things are amazing, but in terms of my personal choices, that's probably one of the top 5 best things I've ever done is to get help. Yeah. So everything's connected in terms of that kind of thing for me, at least. My own trauma, and I try to use it to help people, try to, you and knowing how much that stuff affects people too with, adverse childhood experiences, all of it has really been a kind of a narrative or a guiding part of my life for the most part.
Yeah, that makes sense. And tell me a little bit about how, maybe that shows up in like a session with someone, or you said that basically, you're able to use maybe some experiences you've had or that understanding to maybe connect with people better or understand what they're going through. Tell me a
Yeah,
little.
so in my current role, I work outside of with Ruston Therapy Group. I work in a prison here in Washington State in Monroe. And the reason I bring that up is I was recruited to work there because of my experience working in King County with the different jail mental health jail diversion program where I
Mhm.
help people get out of jail, get into psychiatric care, get into housing, all these different things. But at the same time, I was writing it. I'm still doing the research, but I'm doing it on what I'm researching is if the long-term effects of adverse childhood experiences and how adults who are already affected by that can be treated, basically. And there's lots of negative health outcomes that come from ad adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and I didn't know what ACEs were until about 2023 when when I was in this Master of Social Work program. But when I found out about that, we had taken a test or a ACE quiz in the class, and it's 10 questions, and there's home life ACEs, and then there's a neglect, and then there's abuse. So there's 10 different ACEs within those 3 overarching categories, and at the home one, it's like, uh, being exposed to domestic violence, substance use, being yelled at, and things of that nature within the home environment. And then the abuse ones are there's physical and there's neglect, right? But the physical can be sexual, social, or sexual, physical, and then the neglect is emotional and physical also. But the higher score you have, the more negative outcomes that will affect your life. In the class we took, everybody got a 1 or 2, and I was the only one who got a high score, which was an 8. And the higher you are, so but if with anybody with this, I think it's a 4 or 5 and above, statistically, your span is going to be 20, at least 20 years less than anyone that has a 1 or below, right? That's just statistics showing. And I mean, it's honestly one of the most, I guess, influential things I've ever read, because it's like if you have a 4 or a score of 4 or above, it's 1,000% increase in being an alcoholic and things like that. There's a bunch of different statistics that show that. So when I found that out, I realized that that's the research I wanted to do, is because I've always wondered why I didn't end up like a lot of my friends have. And so once I started doing that research, I was recruited by a person at the prison. Then I went into the prison. I realized like how abundant ACEs are in there as well. So with all that being said, I try to use my experience with in the prison a lot more than I would with out in the community. But unfortunately, I've had a lot of experience with different things in my life. And I want to help people, because I wouldn't have ever been in the position I am now without having been helped by other people too.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it kind of is that full circle moment of like realizing the impact that, maybe a therapist or someone that helped you in your past made. And then
Yeah.
now it's like you want to take that and kind of be that same influence if you can, if people will invite that into their life
Yeah.
and be able to offer that to other people. I think that's super
Yeah.
powerful. And I really appreciate, you being there for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you've kind of recently started your private practice and started working with us, I'd love to, just have you talk a little bit about maybe certain clients that you're hoping to see or people that, maybe resonate with you and your work a little bit. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so of course, folks who are struggling with trauma themselves is something I'm really well versed in. Just male, sorry, men I've had a lot of experience with now in the last 3 years in the current position, but I've also worked with lots of different genders in the Seattle area when I worked down there. I guess I don't really have a specific group of people. I'm open to, okay, that's such a silly thing to say. I'm open to helping people, but I think people that are struggling with personality disorders, any kind of substance abuse, kind of gambling, that area, I've had a lot of experience in. Serious mental illness, which is more, I think people with serious mental illnesses being bipolar, schizophrenia, those types of things are more, they've already probably had counseling because it's such a serious disorder. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't really think of that
That's
question.
okay. Yeah, I guess I was curious, like, just because of hearing, like, you talk right now and how much research you've done on maybe people that have had
Yeah,
a traumatic past, and it sounds like, that's potentially, like, a population you work really well with, people that,
yeah,
have
totally.
and things like that, so, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate, your perspective and you showing up for people. Yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else I had to ask, but yeah, anything else you want to share or feel called to share at this point?
I think some of the folks I've met through therapy, it's such a important thing to do for anyone who's human, which is right, all of us. But the reason I say that is because we as people should need or want to continue to better ourselves, because we're imperfect, right? And that's something I've really learned from doing all the things I've done in education and things. I'm a modest person. I don't like talking about it. I don't, it's not something that I lead with in terms of meeting somebody, but I think it's important because we have to stay curious, right? We have to learn about ourselves, learn about our situations, learn about others. I think one of the biggest things I've learned from doing therapy with people is that there are so many things that we have internally that we sometimes don't express because we assume other people either know about it already or they don't want to hear it, right? And I've done a lot of grief work with people around end of life care or losing people themselves with parents or things of that nature. 'Cause going back to the ACEs stuff, all my grandparents, my parents, a couple of my cousins have all passed away really young from well, in their 50s from substance abuse related issues, right, or cancer. And that's something that has really also influenced me to wanna live a healthier life, wanna be aware of how I'm not only affecting myself, but affecting those I live with and I come in contact with, because we have to have grace for ourselves, right? And grace for the people we interact with and love in our lives. So counseling is really important for that, being centered and grounded. And there's so many different interventions that we can use to help do that, right? It's not just sitting down in like the stereotypical Fortean chair where we're looking at the wall and the doctor's sitting with the clipboard. It's more learning about what you love, learning about how you interact with the world, learning about what those goals are that you have, and a lot of the time just learning how to appreciate ourselves and those simple things we have in our lives rather than always looking for what's next or what's going to be in the future.
Yeah. No, that actually, really hits home, and I think that that resonates with people because it's hard to do that without kind of someone to mirror that to you, without
Yeah.
someone that will really hear you and help you and kinda guide you through the process.
Yeah.
So I definitely, think that that's why it's so powerful to have someone actually reach out and make that step and ask for help because you know, until you experience it.
Yeah. And just learning how to express ourselves as men. I was thinking of this. That's a conversation I have a lot with younger folks when I first meet them, men in particular. We may think we have the tools to talk about ourselves, but if sometimes when we are acted or asked direct questions about, well, how do you share your feelings or how do you talk about conflict? A lot of the time it's either they don't or it only comes up when it's a really stressful moment. I think, especially my generation, was not really taught how to interact with each other in a loving way, right? We're taught how to push it down. And I think now younger people in their 20s and teens, I think have a lot more experience younger in school and things, learning how to share their emotions and interact with their loved ones in a way that's more positive in terms of being able to share their feelings, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as you were talking about that, I was just curious, like a question came up for me of like, so it sounds like kind of a common issue for, men is, being able to like have the tools to like express themselves. Are there any other kind of common themes that tend to show up for the male population or
Yeah,
male people that, identify as males?
yeah. That's a good question. I think just a lot of people especially in today's economy and political environment, there's a lot of unknown questions, kind of the ambiguity of what's going to happen next. And counseling and different grounding methods, especially with DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, there's different ways that we can work on being able to ground yourself in the moment, breathing exercises, things of that nature to really grounding therapies and just really understanding not having control over your life is something that's really hard to come to terms with, especially with technology, right? I think we have become really used to being able to get information immediately, but when we don't have access to it or we really don't have control over something that's happening across the world or politically, it's really hard not to um, perseverate on that, thinking about it over and over and over again. And that's something see that comes up a lot with younger folks is what's going to happen next. And of course, there's so many. I think even more now with the younger people, there's so much expectation on them. There's all these ideas about how instant satisfaction, instant, not satisfaction, what's gratification? Is that what you said? Yeah, and the idea like, "Well, you're 25," or I remember seeing something when I was not even 25 anymore. "Oh, you're 19, you're not a millionaire." Like, that stuff is not accessible, right? It's very it can happen, right? But it's not something that's just gonna happen overnight, and I think being able to help people understand that they're good enough and that they're, you know, that they are valued and that their value of love and admiration and all these different feelings is something that's kind of lost right now. And I just believe that a lot of time people who've been through different things believe the things that have been told to them at a very young age or through some type of toxic relationship. And those are areas that I'm really passionate about changing because it's something that I've survived too, right? Like, not being told you're something terrible after a while becomes fact if that person is supposed to be taking care of you or the only influence you have, right? And there's that can happen when you're older too, in domestic violence relationships, all these different types of scenarios that people are isolated in. They can start thinking of themselves in a negative way that's not true. And that's something I think that therapy can really help, is just reshape their view, cognitive restructuring, right?
Mhm.
Not really like CBT kind of stuff, but reshaping the way you look at yourself in the world, not necessarily learning completely new behaviors, but just changing those feelings of inequity, lack of a better word, and anxiety comes from that, and these different feelings that are all really based on being fearful of something that's been instilled in them. So, one of the things I always tell my clients is just have grace for, if you're so kind to other people, where's that kindness for yourself? You know,
Mhm.
where's the grace for yourself? Why don't you get those things that you're giving to other people? And that's can sometimes be one of the best questions to start with, because it's returning the mirror really on yourself in a good way, not just being like, you need to change this. This is bad, you know. So it's
Yeah, because that's
important.
what, we as humans tend to do, right? And so it's like to kind of go against that grain and turn the mirror on yourself in a positive light and make sure that we are giving a voice to those kind of unheard things that you'll say to yourself and be like, let's question that. Let's actually
Yeah.
question that and see if that's actually true or if this is just something you've learned over time. I think that'd be really powerful for people.
And one thing you said too that while you were speaking, I was thinking of is there's also a fine line within therapeutic practices, I think, where of course we want to support our clients and have them learn to love themselves, but also, we got to ask the harder questions too sometimes. If somebody's in a position where their own behaviors are not safe towards others or whatever the case may be, I'm just generalizing. It's important for, as therapists, that we help people be the best person they can too. I was listening to something yesterday and the therapist was saying you can be a therapist and tell somebody what they want to hear and not have any real impact on them, or you can tell them what they don't want to hear to change their lives. And they may not enjoy that at first, but it's also something that can be really beneficial going forward. And that's not always the case, right, within therapy, but it's important to remember to give people tasks between sessions to try to have them better themselves and have good boundaries and healthy relationships and all these different things. And sometimes all it takes is a reminder, right? If did you do this? Did you do that? Writing things down, all these are really good tools to help the therapeutic process continue from outside of the session rather than just always focusing on what's going on.
Yeah, because I think you can, kind of get lost in the moment of maybe what's going on for that person. But I think having those tools in between can help it be maybe more impactful. And it's not always going to be an easy process. It's not always going to be fun. And, there's times where you may feel frustrated or, like it may be, it's bringing up things for you that are hard to think about and talk about. But that's a lot of the work.
Yeah, and exactly, Cassidy. That's something that is, I think, really difficult for anyone to be able to do, is start reacting to something and then having, and this is something that someone I worked with always reminded me, is like when somebody's reacting to something in a session and they're having a really negative reaction, it's a lot of the time, as people, as therapists, we're healers by nature, right? We want to calm them down. What's
Yeah,
going
you want
on?
better. You,
Right.
you want to try to make them feel better.
But one way to do that too is to ask them what's going on right now. Like, what is it that you're feeling? And that's something that I've really tried to remember to do, is if somebody's triggered right in a session or feeling a certain way, like be able to externalize that and identify it and realize that that feeling isn't objective, right? It's not something that's actually material. It's something that you can control inside of you. And that's something too that's really important in therapy, I found.
Yeah, like the feelings or whatever is going on, it's not you, it's something that's occurring within you. It's, a set of
Yeah.
circumstances or things you've learned or some internal dialogue, but it's not actually you, and you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
observe it and make, different decisions. Maybe if that's maybe something you don't want to be upset about. So
Yeah.
that's really powerful for people. Absolutely. Well, yeah, that just like resonated with me so much. So I just, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, for sure. Thank
Awesome.
you
Well,
for
thank you so
talking
much
with me.
for, coming and sharing space with me and spending some time. I really just enjoyed getting to like pick your brain and hear a little bit about what you do.
Of course, thank you for having me.